Welcome to the Personal Tanya, Day 17, Game-Changing Inspirations in the Daily Tanya. Today, we're taking on a beautiful concept called, which I'm gonna describe as consequences instead of punishments. You see, in Judaism, we often come across these punishments, purgatory or some other kind of spiritual punishment, and we think it's a punishment, but really, there's a science to our spirituality. And according to the nature of the crime, is the nature of the correction. It's a correction. It's not a vengeance. It's more what I like to call therapy, healing, than it is retribution. Take a look. So, when it comes to sins of passion, for example, we go to a place called purgatory of fire. We Jews, we don't believe in hell. Hell is some sort of eternal damnation place. Purgatory comes from the word purging. Purging, which means cleansing. So, sins of passion are corrected, therapied in a place called purgatory of fire. Sins of laziness, sins of omission are corrected, therapied in a place called Gehenom Shel Sheleg, the purgatory of snow, the purgatory of ice. It's an ice therapy. It's a different form of therapy for sins of laziness and omission. And then there's sins of dissonance, which are inconsistencies, cognitive dissonance, which are corrected through something called kaf hakela, which we'll talk about in just a short moment. So what we've been talking about in the Tanya, the flow of Tanya, and today's Tanya, is how our mission in this world is to fix this world. What that means is that we have to engage with things that are neither holy nor unholy and use them for a holy purpose. Food, money, work, furniture, houses, travel, vacation, relationships, all the above. When you use it for a holy purpose, you take food and you eat it for a mitzvah. Use money and you give it to charity, or you give some of it to charity, a tenth. When you use a vacation in order to connect with your family, or in order to connect with your God, to connect with yourself, as opposed to a selfish reason, what you've done is you've taken the energy of that physical experience and you've sanctified it in the holy intention. It's sanctified through the power of thought. But what happens if you did the neutral experience, not for a holy purpose? You did it for a selfish purpose. Then the energy descends instead of ascending into holiness. You've failed to do tikkun olam, and today we're going to talk about 4 implications of a failed tikkun olam experience and their consequences. Specifically, we're going to be talking about speech and secular wisdom. These are the 2 topics today. So when it comes to speech, there's talking words that are frivolous, just not words of wisdom, not words of Torah, not words of kindness, just words that are simply empty words, just regular frivolous talk, nonsensical speech, just regular casual killing time kind of conversation. What happened is that for an ordinary person who speaks like this, these words and the energy of the speech has descended into what we call klippa, unholiness, instead of holiness. You failed to do your tikkun olam. And therefore, the only way to correct this, the Tanya tells us today, is through something called kaf hakela, which means the slingshot. Just like a slingshot, when David's slingshot, the stone goes from one end to the other in rapid succession. What happens is that in heaven, the soul is shown 2 screens, like in an IMAX theater. You've seen the screen of what happened in your life and what could have happened. And it's the confluence, the contrast of these 2 experiences of what the life that you lived and the life that you should have, could have, would have lived, that actually serves as some sort of a narrative therapy to redirect the healing, to redo the past, and to elevate the physical experience into its holiness, into its holy place. This is how we are able to retroactively correct the mistakes through a consequence, not a punishment, called kaf hakela, which is the slingshot. Then there's something called forbidden speech. What happens if you didn't say words that were just empty, but just words that were actually forbidden, like slander or gossip, things that you're not allowed to actually say? This is something which is actually forbidden. It's not just neutral. Here, kaf hakela, the slingshot, is insufficient. And here the soul will need to descend into a place called purgatory, regular purgatory of fire, because, you spoke with passion, you spoke heatedly about someone else, and you said, can you believe what that person did? And because you did that, you've got to be healed through the therapy of purgatory, which is kind of like a dry cleaner. Not that the clothing is being punished, the suit is being punished to go into the hot water, but it goes into the hot water in order to take out the stains. And that's what we're doing. We're retroactively correcting the energy that could have gone into holiness and descended into unholiness. And by the Gehenom of fire, the purgatory, is what cleanses the soul and brings it up there. By the way, Hayom Yom and the Rebbe tells us that when we can mitigate the need for Gehenom For kafakela, I'm sorry. We can mitigate the need for kafakela by reciting words of Chumash, of Mishnah, of Tehillim, and Tanya as often as possible. But what about words that are frivolous, words that are empty, not forbidden, just words that are frivolous, spoken by somebody who knows better, like a scholar? If a Torah scholar who really has no excuse for speaking such words. For him, the Tanya says today, the kafakela is not enough to purify him. He needs specific therapy to that relate to neglecting an action mitzvah through laziness. For example, the Gehenna Shel Sheleg, the purgatory of snow and ice, which is sins committed through omission, sins committed through laziness, need to be corrected through a purgatory of snow and ice, which is a different kind of soul therapy, of which we're not so familiar. I mean, this is a spiritual heavenly experience, but at least we're getting a glimpse behind the veil, a glimpse into the other world through today's Tanya. The final piece of today's Tanya introduces us to the concept of studying wisdom of secular sciences. This basically means wisdom that's not a Torah wisdom. It's not based in Torah. For example, when you go to college, and college is filled with atheism and agnosticism and alternative values that are in conflict to the values of our Torah. When you read and study that kind of stuff, it's actually far worse than speaking words that are empty, because words that are empty affect your emotions, but they're not cerebral. But when you study secular wisdom, you're actually contaminating your intellect, which is far more subtle and far more powerful, far more dangerous, which is why you've got to be very, very careful with studying secular sciences. The only excuse for studying secular sciences, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya today, is if you need it for a job, like the Rambam, Maimonides, or Nachmanides, who needed to become physicians, so they had to learn it as a profession under duress to survive, or if you're doing it in order to be able to understand Torah better, right? If you're doing it in order to study Torah, then that's okay. But you got to be really careful to protect your most precious asset, your brain. You got to be aware of the contamination zone, protect the purity of your soul. So in other words, the study of the secular sciences is actually worse than words that are spoken frivolously, for which you would need kafakela. You would actually need to experience some deeper form of soul therapy to extract that kind of contamination, which could actually have a greater impact on your anxiety and inability to function efficiently and in equilibrium, because your brain and your heart will reach a state of cognitive dissonance. You're going to be very, very careful. This really concludes the tour of our souls in the first 8 chapters of Tanya. Now that we are familiar with what our soul is, until now, we barely believed that we had a soul. Now we know that we have a soul. We have 2 souls, and we're able to actually recognize them and describe them. We know that they have intellect, they have emotion, they have garments, they have different forms of expression, and we learned about how they engage with themselves. From chapter 9 through 17, we're going to explore how they interact with each other. And we're going to find a quick way, a shortcut method, to be able to have a meaningful relationship with God Almighty, and that's going to be through chapters 9 through 17. So that's a wrap. Let's try to apply. You can do this.